chose the path of cooperation over competition and rivalry. Their vision was clear. It was one to pursue our development not as isolated nations, but as a united community.
And to the Mountain Kingdom of Lesotho, where it hosted the second session of the Binational Commission with South Africa today. A delegation of at least 15 South African cabinet ministers met with their Basotho counterparts ahead of today's meeting in Maseru between President Cyril Ramaphosa and Lesotho's Prime Minister Sam Matekane. South Africa's Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Ronald Lamola.
We welcome the launch of phase 2 of the project. We recognize that this project contributes immensely to the growth of our economies, the development of our infrastructure, and ensures water security not only to the two countries but potentially to other countries in the region. Secondly, we recognize that there is a need to address migration issues between the two countries and facilitate the free movement of people across the borders. In this regard, we assigned the relevant ministries with the responsibility of developing a migration model that will address all the challenges that we are currently experiencing, taking into consideration the unique geographical locations of the two countries. We must stop criminality across our borders.
And we move on to South Africa Reserve Bank Governor Lesetja Kganyago suggesting narrowing the agenda and establishing better processes for the G20 for it to reclaim its impact. Kganyago delivered the keynote address at an event in Washington for the 2025 spring meeting of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund alongside the G20 finance track ministers and central bank governors meeting. This is what he had to say.
The G20 has demonstrated its value during crises, most notably at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, where it served as a central forum for coordinating responses and mobilizing finance. It has strengthened the global financial safety net with a better resourced International Monetary Fund at its center and has facilitated expanded resource commitments for the multilateral development banks.
Africa World Hour. Africa World Hour. Unpacking global headlines from an African perspective.
And that brings the time to 9:05. You are listening to Africa World Hour. I am Tsepiso Makwetla. Welcome. Remember, we'd like to hear from you. This is a program that not just tells you what's happening around the world. We would like you to dictate the agenda for us by telling us what's impacting your world. And of course, you can reach out to us on the socials. If you'd like to send us a WhatsApp voice note, you're most welcome to do so. The number is 063 406 9126. So now let's tell you about some of the other stories that are making headlines today. We go to Libya. Since arriving in Libya 2 months ago, the UN Special Representative Hannah Tete has been engaging with key political figures to address the complex challenges facing the country as it struggles to recover from years of civil war and multiple crises. While there is general agreement for the need for elections, Tete has told UN News that consensus on moving forward remains elusive. So we'll get to that in just a moment. So let's start here in South Africa, where an unknown number of patient files have been destroyed in a fire at the Tembisa Provincial Tertiary Hospital east of Johannesburg earlier on today. The incident comes just days after the fire broke out at the same hospital in an outpatient area adjacent to the Accident and Emergency Unit last Saturday. For more on this, we're joined on the line by South Africa's Deputy Health Minister, Dr. Joe Phaahla, who visited the facility today. Dr. Phaahla, good evening, and thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us here on Channel Africa.
Good evening. Good to hear from you, Tsepiso, and good evening to the listeners.
And it's good to hear, Minister, that you, Deputy Minister, that you are able to go to Tembisa Hospital, see for yourself and get an eyewitness account, I'd imagine, of what exactly happened. So from putting out the fire this weekend to today, did you get what you would say is a coherent answer on what exactly happened?
Not really. Maybe just to say that the Saturday evening fire actually destroyed the accident and emergency section of the hospital. So that part is completely non-functional. It's going to take some time to rebuild. All equipment are destroyed, the infrastructure inside. So it's going to be almost like putting up a new facility on that site. That's the extent of the fire damage there. And of course, as you said in your intro, early this morning the fire broke up in the section where they store patient files. Now, in terms of really what is the root cause of these fires, one couldn't get a sense. I mean, to the extent of frustration, even when one was trying to understand, because the first thing which I asked, I mean, an accident and emergency unit in a big area like Tembisa on the weekend, especially on a weekend, definitely it's a very busy place. I mean, we know, one of when you talk about the quadruple burden of disease in South Africa, one of the four, it's trauma, accidents and trauma, and one was trying to understand. I mean, the place must have been quite bustling with a lot of patients seeking attention and also staff members. Somebody must have seen some spark and identify that there's fire emerging from here. But when asking the team there, including the management, they said the only thing which some of the people said, they could just detect some smell of the smoke. And then after that, it was all flames. And I mean, they had to quickly evacuate. So in terms of just that aspect in a busy area, it looks like we're really going to rely on the forensic investigation.
And that, I'd imagine the job would be made difficult by the fact that I understand that there are some functional CCTV cameras, but those that were working did not manage to capture anything that would help with what may have sparked this fire.
Well, especially the main damage, which is in the accident and emergency, what I could get from the management is that in that section, there's virtually no hope of any kind of, recording which is likely to be available. It didn't look like there was any camera, whether maybe externally focusing directly on the accident and emergency. Inside, anything which would have been inside would have been totally damaged. So that wouldn't have been useful unless maybe some material where, but all in all, what I gathered from the CEO and the management was that the only area where there might be some material evidence in terms of recording, it might be the filing office where the patient's records were held, where there is an external camera which might shed some light, but even there they said, it's very unlikely that it could be of good material. So on both the Saturday fire and this morning's fire, in terms of technology like that of CCTVs, it doesn't look like we're going to get much joy from that.
Have you been quoted correctly, Minister, when saying that the two incidents are unrelated? And if that is the case, what do you base this conclusion on?
Well, I'm basing the conclusion on the fact that the one fire, the big fire, was on Saturday evening. It was extinguished. There were no reports of any. I mean, remember, this is by almost at the very latest midnight, early hours of Sunday, there was actually, all the fire was being extinguished. Whole of Sunday, whole of Monday. What are we today? Whole of Tuesday, and then Wednesday morning. So you have a full, almost 72 hours, and also the fact that there is a gap between the fire in the emergency section and the filing section. There are other, rooms, consulting rooms, outpatient rooms between the emergency and the filing area where there is nothing. So the physical link between the two is non-existent.
Okay.
There's a time lag, but also the physical link. So there is no way in which then, unless the link could be, unless if what started the other fire also started the other one, whatever the source. But in terms of saying this might be just, an after effect of the first one, something residual, an extinguished fire, which then ignited that, even if I'm not an expert, it doesn't look, realistic to think there could be a link.
What about the occupational health and safety conditions at the hospital? And I ask this against the backdrop that there has been criticism that many hospitals in Gauteng do not meet this OSH conditions. They're not compliant. And if you could also tell us about this particular hospital, Tsepiso Tertiary Hospital, if it had any smoke detectors or anything that would have been able to pick up smoke and deter a fire spreading to the level that it did?
Well, the answer is definitely no in terms of compliance. That it's on record that, we know that a number of facilities, when there was a fire at Charlotte as a central referral hospital, it was non-compliant. And that's why what happened, and that's why as part of a major component of the refurbishment of Charlotte, central to it was to make it compliant in terms of occupation specific, in terms of occupational safety. So that is still ongoing. Some sections of Charlotte are now fully compliant, but we know, and there's as I was there with some of the senior officials from Gauteng, they confirmed. And because of the fact that by the time many of them were built, there was some of the modern requirements in terms of safety, including escape, including fire detection, sprinklers, and all those were not necessarily a requirement at the time when the hospitals were commissioned. But of course, with movement of time, we should actually have made sure. But I can tell you that it's not only in Gauteng. It's just that we know what is required. But with the pressure of financial resources, there is some catch-up. All that we are doing, especially now, is to make sure that any new facility must meet the occupational health safety requirements. But to upgrade the old ones is quite a mammoth task.
And I asked this, Deputy Minister, because there was that small fire at Bertha Hospital. It was pretty much almost the same time last year, May last year, in which the CCTV cameras were able to pick up the cause or the source of the fire, and that is one of the mental health patients there, I think, sneaking in a cigarette or something and lighting matches. So in that case, they were able to establish, what the cause of the fire is. But as a provincial government, and even as part of national, as you say, there may be financial constraints, but you are aware that there are these vulnerabilities. What is the plan going forward? Is there, beyond this investigation, going to be a more collaborative effort at looking at infrastructure and saying, what can we do to upgrade and fix?
Well, definitely. I think it brings to the forth that even though we have immediate pressure in terms of just making sure that we expand access in terms of more facilities, equipment, and just basic medical standard and healthcare standard, but the issues around safety, including fire safety, is really just bringing that to the fore, to say that amongst our teams who are dealing with, when you talk about refurbishment, you'd remember, Tsepiso, that until recently, when there was stability on load shedding, one of the key issues which we had to prioritize was to say, in terms of upgrading, we must also upgrade our storage of electricity, including non-grid in terms of solar and others, and But what it brings to the fore is also that this issue of safety, occupational and especially fire safety, has to be also one of the top priorities, which in our budgeting, as we year after year provide support for upgrade of infrastructure, it has to be brought much more upfront.
And I know the suggestion has been made, it has been put out there, and I don't know how helpful it is to ask you this question because there really isn't any evidence suggesting it, but people will be asking themselves, could it be the work of us? And this makes a very complicated investigation further complicated, but what are your confidence levels of how soon you'll be able to get some semblance of definitive answers?
It's fire is difficult. I mean, I'm learning, also from just the experience at Charlotte Matake Academic Hospital, where the investigation by, the crime investigators, including SAPS and others, said to us, gave us a report which said that this was not an accident. And they came to the conclusion that it was human caused. But at the end, up to today, that's about 4 years now, and I mean they concluded that I think about a year or two ago and gave a report which pointed to a human cause, but they could not. They said that they needed further, deeper investigation, but which we still don't have today, in terms of if it was man-made, what actually seems to have happened. Can somebody be held accountable? So we're just crossing our fingers that maybe on this one we may get more better information. But just from the past experience, it's not too encouraging. But we know, I don't think we should cast doubt on the expertise of those who are doing the investigation.
So there were no casualties in this case, Deputy Minister, but do we know what the impact has been of housing those that may have been affected? Because I'd imagine that resources are also limited if one is thinking about the danger of taking them to infrastructure that, suffers from those OSH compliance variables. And we saw the disaster that happened at Tambo Memorial Hospital. That was devastating. And, it leaves a lot of trauma behind. So for those that you are relocating, what do they suffer from mostly?
Well, because this is an accident and emergency, what they had to do is to reallocate those who are still being attended to the nearest, you mentioned Tambo Memorial, Edenvale, amongst others. Betha Kowa would also come in. So, and even in because Tembisa, as you would remember, is not also too far from Pretoria. There were some patients who were moved to Kalafong Hospital. So, because these are patients who are still being assessed, being attended to, all that they needed to do, assemble emergency ambulances and be able to move the patients and make sure once they are stabilized, then they can be those who needed admission would then be admitted in those facilities. Subsequent to that, all other emergencies who would otherwise be directed to Tembisa Hospital have then been redirected to the other facilities. And otherwise, in terms of those who who have to be attended to for more non-emergency chronic ailments, that is still carrying on in the clinics and the outpatients department, because those have not really been affected. So the major disruption is really that they had to redistribute. But fortunately, even in that regard, there is no report of anybody who, because of in the process of the movement, suffered, a fatality. So that's really the good thing at this stage.
Deputy Health Minister, we thank you so much for your time. Dr. Joe Phatla speaking to us about the visit that he paid earlier on to Tembisa Tertiary Hospital after another fire broke out. That's days of the one that occurred at the weekend.
Você é fluente em português? É apaixonado por rádio e quer trabalhar na África do Sul? Você tem documentos que o qualificam para trabalhar na África do Sul? Nesse caso, podemos ter uma oportunidade para você trabalhar no Canal África. Envie seu currículo e demonstração para Canal África at newsroom@ @channelafrica.co.za. Lembre-se, se você não receber alguma resposta nossa em 14 dias, isso significa que você não foi selecionado. Canal África, a perspectiva africana.
Tsepiso Makwetla winds it down on Africa World Hour, 9 to 10 p.m.
23 minutes past 9 here on Africa World Hour. Very good evening to you. Welcome if you've just joined us as we dial down on some of the day's top stories and, of course, unpack some of the ones that we believe would require attention. So let's talk about this one. The United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, is calling for immediate and concerted efforts to tackle the alarming nutrition crisis affecting about 13 million children with acute malnutrition in Eastern and Southern Africa, of which it says nearly 4 million children are estimated to suffer from severe acute malnutrition. For more on this, we joined on the line from Nairobi to Alina Michalska, nutrition specialist at UNICEF's Eastern and Southern Africa region. A very good evening to you.
Good evening, Tsepiso.
I know this is semantics, but it is important to understand. So when we talk about acute malnutrition and severe acute malnutrition, what is the difference?
Well, acute malnutrition is a form of undernutrition, and severe acute malnutrition is the most lethal form of malnutrition. So what that means is children with severe acute malnutrition, or SAM, that's the acronym, are up to 11 times more likely to die than healthy children. Nearly half of all deaths in children under 5 are actually attributable to malnutrition. Severe acute malnutrition puts children at greater risk of dying from common infections, increases the frequency and severity of those infections, and delays recovery, and as a result can severely overwhelm fragile health systems. So that means that children suffering from SAM require urgent treatment and interventions. So a child first needs to be identified as suffering from severe acute malnutrition and then can be sent for treatment. And many children can actually be treated through community-based treatment, while the most critical cases with medical complications are treated in health facilities.
And now I want to talk about what would be considered a nutritious diet, particularly against the backdrop of food insecurity, which has been spreading, especially in conflict areas and because of climate change, and of course a more impoverished society because of the geopolitical challenges that we face. So of these children, can you explain the set of circumstances that they live in?
Absolutely. So in Eastern and Southern Africa, as you mentioned at the top, we do have an alarming nutrition crisis that's affecting almost 13 million children with acute malnutrition. Of those, nearly 4 million are estimated to suffer from that most severe form, from severe acute malnutrition. But in addition to the children who are suffering from severe acute malnutrition, we're also seeing an alarming food crisis in the region. Every child has the right to a nutritious diet, and yet here across Eastern and Southern Africa, 1 in 3 children today is living in severe food poverty. What this means is that they're surviving on 1 or 2 food groups a day. Most often that is cereals and breast milk, and on some days even less. In addition to this, 4 of 10 children in this region consume 0 fruits or vegetables in this daily diet. So all of this is really indicating that we are in a malnutrition crisis in this region.
And you talk about Somalia facing a particularly dire situation, of which you say an estimated 4.4 million people. That's nearly a quarter of Somalia's population will experience crisis level hunger. Again, I ask the question, what is crisis level hunger?
So crisis level hunger, really, we're talking about almost 500,000 children, so more than 460,000 children that are projected to face severe acute malnutrition in Somalia. And in addition to this, in Somalia, 2/3 of children, so that's over the regional average, double the regional average, are living in severe food poverty, surviving on 1 or 2 food groups per day. So it's the ongoing poor rainfall and drought, coupled with high food prices and conflict, that have really exacerbated this crisis in Somalia, and it's leaving families struggling to access essential nutrition services, as well as health services and proper water, sanitation, and hygiene. And the country is projecting increased SAM admissions for treatment this year.
And it's sad to see that it's often the countries that have had to contend with an ongoing security situation. You've recently put out a report on the Sudan on how it affects women, infants and children, but particularly even young girls of reproductive health age. Just speak to us about the particular concerns there.
Absolutely. I mean, Eastern and Southern Africa region is facing high levels of malnutrition across the life cycle, driven by a combination of many things, of repeated shocks and stresses in particular, which include recurring climate disasters such as droughts, cyclones, and floods, insecurity, economic instability, disease outbreaks, and also funding cuts to life-saving nutrition assistance for communities in need. Poor care and feeding practices and poor access to services also drive undernutrition. Children experiencing both chronic and acute vulnerabilities make them highly susceptible to the impact of all these shocks. And if underlying vulnerabilities are not addressed, these risks and hazards, they lead to surges in the number of pregnant and breastfeeding women, in the number of children, and in the number of adolescents that are experiencing malnutrition. And this leads to increased morbidity and mortality, in particular for the youngest. And for those who do survive, they may face long-term negative impacts throughout the life cycle.
And in this environment of increasing aid cuts, I mean, we've been speaking about the United States of America, but it's not just the US. There are European countries that are also cutting down on their development aid to the continent. What position does it put you in, especially if you say you are trying to ensure that there is availability of ready-to-use therapeutic food?
Yeah. Well, this global funding crisis is impacting not just UNICEF, but also the broader international development and humanitarian ecosystem. This includes key partners. Funding cuts are risking the hard-earned gains and future progress for children. So in this region, in Eastern and Southern Africa, UNICEF's funding for our emergency nutrition response is particularly at risk, where we estimate nearly 15 million children and mothers could have their access to nutrition programs disrupted, leaving them vulnerable to becoming severely malnourished, as funding shortages are hampering efforts to reach all those in need.
And as you say, it threatens the SDG goals, particularly 3.1, 3.2, that you have been working towards 2030 and even 2050. But what can be done in the immediate future, not only by governments who in the past there's been a criticism that there's been too much reliance on aid. What is possible and what's not, and what did you have in your long-term plan to mitigate the nutrition crisis as UNICEF within the means that you have?
So in terms of immediate needs, we do need sufficient stocks of ready-to-use therapeutic food, which is essential for the treatment of children with severe acute malnutrition. You can think of ready-to-use therapeutic food as a high-energy fortified paste, like a medical peanut butter, which is essential for this treatment of severe acute malnutrition. And stocks are expected to run out by mid-2025 in Ethiopia, Somalia, and South Sudan, putting millions of children at risk of dying. But you also asked the question about the longer term needs, and we also need continued investments not only in these curative interventions, meaning treatment for severe acute malnutrition, but also around building community nutritional resilience, which is more critical than ever now that we're seeing increased severity and magnitude of climate and other shocks and stresses in the region. So UNICEF's long-term response plan includes strengthening efforts to prevent malnutrition, enhancing integrated interventions, including access to nutritious food, safe water, basic healthcare, and teaching healthy hygiene practices. UNICEF also has firm commitments with stakeholders to address the root causes of malnutrition in the region, and this includes improving children's first foods, food environments, and food practices.
Thank you so much for speaking to us. Much appreciated, and I'm sure it's something that a lot of us should keep in mind as we grapple with the issue of food insecurity wherever we are. As I'm sure a lot of you have been taught to say, think about the children in Ethiopia and Somalia, and I think it's something that many of us grew up with, and thinking it's a an urban tale, but as you see, it's still reality to today. So it's also important for us to be mindful of food wastage, which is something that the United Nations, I think even the Secretary General gave figures on not so long ago, on just how much food is wasted around the world. So thank you very much for speaking to us on this very important issue. That is Alina Michalska, nutrition specialist at UNICEF's Eastern and Southern Africa region, speaking to us from Nairobi. It brings the time to exactly 27 minutes to 10. You're listening to Africa World Hour here on Channel Africa.
Africa in Business on Channel Africa.
An investigation by South Africa's non-profit organization Open Secrets has found that telecoms company MTN has played a role in shutting down the internet during elections and wars in Sudan, Cameroon, Iran, Afghanistan and Uganda, thus enabling governments to silence the opposition.
Interestingly, this isn't just unique to MTN. I think the report also looks at Vodacom DRC as being a proponent of one of these violations, particularly in shutting down the internet during the elections in 2018 and 2019. Autocratic regimes are able to utilize the licenses that they have with these telecom companies, basically to, suppress political dissent. And the result is that many people are left without connectivity. And not only does this affect people's ability to communicate with their loved ones and access vital emergency services, but also at a very basic level of access to information.
The Open Secrets investigator, Lu Vono Nduli.
Africa in Business on Channel Africa. Weekdays from 1 to 2 p.m. Central African Time. Africa World Hour. Africa World Hour. Unpacking global headlines from an African perspective.
And just 25 minutes of that to continue before Heartlines. So we take you to Libya now. We mentioned it earlier on that since arriving 2 months ago, UN Special Representative Hannah Tete has been engaging with key political figures to address the complex challenges facing that country as it struggles to bring about peace from years of civil strife and multiple crises. Now, while there is general agreement on the need for elections, Tete has told the UN organization news department that consensus on moving towards remains elusive, emphasizing the importance of strengthening democracy and also through a government which has actually a genuine mandate from the people. Reem Abaza began asking Tete for her key takeaways so far on the UN's top official visit to Libya.
During these first 2 months, there were a couple of things I wanted to do. I wanted to meet with all of the key Libyan interlocutors, not just to introduce myself, but to have a sense from them on what their views were on progressing the political process, why, from their perspective, we had the challenges that we have, and what they thought about the newly launched committee of advisors that were selected by UNSMIL as a technical committee to review the challenges surrounding the electoral process and to make recommendations to UNSMIL as to how those issues could be addressed as part of establishing a new roadmap towards getting the country out of this transition phase towards elections and to a government that would have, hopefully, the strong support of the Libyan people, which is necessary to address some of the challenges they face at the moment, the de facto fracturing between East and West, and the continuing fracturing of national institutions, which, if it were to continue down that trajectory, would be particularly unhelpful.
And what did you hear from them?
Different views and different perspectives. So all of them agreed on the need for elections. But of course, the variations were as to how to get there. On the Western side, the perspective was, it's not just enough to think about establishing a government that would move the country towards elections. They were more along the lines of, there are particular issues that need to be addressed, and let's focus on those issues. And some were of the view that one of those issues was to have an agreed constitution before elections could be held. For others, it was more along the lines of unifying institutions and especially creating operational readiness in the key institutions that would be responsible for managing elections. On the eastern side, most of the feedback were towards establishing a new government and then having a government that would prepare the country for elections. Now, of course, these are two completely divergent views, except for the fact that they all agree that the end goal should be elections. And from my perspective, I think it's important to note that all of Libya's institutions actually have outlived the original mandate period for their legitimacy, without exception. And it's important not just for the process of strengthening democracy as a concept, but ensuring that people in responsible oversight positions understand that they have some accountability to allow for that elections process to take place.
Elections have been a long-standing issue. A lot of efforts have been done by the United Nations, but still there are many sticking points. What are these sticking points exactly, and what are you doing or plan to do to try to bring people together?
Well, that is why we, UNSMIL, established the Committee of Advisors to give us proposals towards being able to organize elections. But elections take a number of elements in order to ensure that they are successful. They are not an end in themselves, they are a means to an end. And what is that end? It's to have a stable government with a clear mandate, which has the confidence of its people and therefore is able to take decisions on their behalf. But there's a process to get there. But I'm confident that if there is the political will, it can be done. And the reason why I say that is because at the moment, Libya is in the second phase of organizing municipal elections. And the first phase of the organization of municipal elections went reasonably well. Voter registration has been conducted, which means that one of the basics of conducting a national election is already being put in place.
But do you have a commitment from the parties that they will agree on the proposals you're waiting for right now on the elections, for example?
You see, talking to Libyan political parties, they want to have elections. There are many political parties. They're relatively small. If there was a bit more consolidation into bigger parties, they would have a stronger voice. People have the right to form political parties, and it's also their responsibility once they've formed a party to canvass what they stand for so that others can come and support them and help them to be stronger. So on the side of political parties, I don't think that's the issue. It's the key political actors who are responsible and at the helm of leadership of the governance institutions today. The House of Representatives, the High State Council. There's a dispute in the leadership of the High State Council. So the organization itself has issues regarding its effectiveness. Engaging with the LNA, engaging with the Government of National Unity, recognizing that there are other armed groups that also hold considerable sway. Some of these actors may not necessarily think that having an election has benefits for them. And so you've got to look at what the main concerns are. And in preparing this roadmap, find a way of addressing those concerns so that they can come on board for an election to take place.
And that there was the UN Special Representative for Libya, Hannah Tete, speaking to Reem Abaza of UN News. And now at 19 minutes to 10, let's tell you about the latest with China. And that is the country has accused the United States of severely undermining the rule-based multinational system, seriously disputing or rather disrupting the global economic order while infringing on the legitimate rights and interests of all countries, China says. These remarks by China's ambassador to the United Nations after convening of an informal meeting of the Security Council titled Impact of Unilateralism and Bullying Practices on International Relations, where Washington's unilateral reciprocal tariff policy came into sharp criticism. Briefing the meeting, internationally renowned economist and Columbia University Professor Jeffrey Sachs accused the U.S. of being the least aligned country with UN multilateralism and of imposing tariff measures that are utterly unjustified. Sean Bryce Pease has more on this.
Even as signs emerge in Washington of a possible cooling in trade tensions with Beijing, China warned that the world had entered a new phase of turbulence and transformation, with unilateralism on the rise. China's ambassador to the UN, Fu Kong.
美方打着所谓追求对等公平的旗号。
The U.S. is playing a zero-sum game, which is essentially about subverting the existing international economic and trade order by means of tariffs, putting U.S. interests above the common good of the international community, and advancing hegemonic ambitions of the U.S. at the cost of the legitimate interest of all countries. The world once again finds itself at a crucial crossroads. Should we firmly advocate multilateralism, or should we allow unilateralism to spread unchecked? Should we promote democracy in international relations, or should we condone power politics? Should we abide by international law and the basic rules governing international relations, or should we return to the law of the jungle where the strong prey on the weak? On these major issues concerning the fundamental interests of all countries and the future of mankind, the international community must make the right choice, make its unified voice heard, and take joint action.
Beijing's envoy argued that the imposition of high tariffs deprived poorer countries of development, severely impacting the achievement of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda.
发展是各国的普遍权利。
Development is the universal right of all countries, not the exclusive privilege of a few. The fruits of development should increasingly and more equitably benefit every country and every individual. The rich countries getting richer while the poor countries remaining poor is not an option. For the global south, and in particular the least developed countries, the imposition of high tariffs is no different from depriving them of the right to development.
While public policy analyst and economist Professor Jeffrey Sachs sought to dismantle the U.S. narrative that reciprocal tariffs were about addressing large U.S. trade deficits with countries.
The tariff measures are utterly unjustified by the economic claims of the U.S. government. The tariffs are directed towards a trade deficit that is not the fault of China's partners, but is the result of America's large budget deficits and low private saving. And so the United States is blaming other countries for its own economic policies. And this is extremely important. There is no excuse for these unilateral tariffs, not remotely are they related to unfair practices of the rest of the world somehow cheating the United States. Now, the claim of the U.S. government was never examined by Congress. It was never debated in the public. It was made as a matter of an emergency decree that also, in my view, not only violates multilateralism, but also the U.S. Constitution, where Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution absolutely gives the power of tariffs to the U.S. Congress, not to the President of the United States.
The U.S. representative Ting Wu hit back at China, accusing it of weaponizing its donor status and development projects to bully member states.
Today's meeting is a performative maneuver. The premise is devoid of any substance or credibility. The world should look at China's actions rather than its empty claims when judging its contributions to the international system. For far too long, China has deployed unilateral unfair trade practices that hurt not only the United States, but market economies and workers around the world. China continues to use state subsidies and other non-market practices to build overcapacity and flood the world with exports, displacing local economies. Beijing has also taken a variety of non-tariff actions aimed at hurting farmers and manufacturers all over the world via dual-use export prohibitions, applied sanctions, and antitrust and anti-dumping investigations. Beijing continues to manipulate international financial institutions' resources, borrowing only to relend, burnish its reputation, and line its pockets with lucrative development contracts. President Trump is resetting the trade environment so that China can no longer take advantage.
Some council members pointed to other actions of unilateralism and bullying that have undermined the UN Charter, including instances where the sovereignty and territorial integrity of states are violated, including by permanent members of the Security Council. There was also some concern raised that this council was not the right forum for a debate focused on trade, rather the purview of the World Trade Organization or the UN Conference on Trade and Development. But China's concept note for this meeting argues that US tariffs are having an adverse effect on progress towards the SDGs and the urgent need to uphold multilateralism and defend the basic norms of international relations. And while views were ventilated here, any resolution to differences on trade will likely come in a bilateral format, far from the halls of these United Nations. I'm Shervin Bryce-Pease in New York.
And from New York to Johannesburg, where the Electoral Commission of South Africa says it's unlikely that electronic voting will be used in the upcoming local government elections. Officials from the IEC gave an update on its preparations heading to those elections. The Commission recently held an e-voting conference where it looked at the feasibility of moving from paper-based elections to electronic. Ndladla Mahlangu has more.
In March this year, the Commission hosted an international conference on the feasibility of electronic voting in South Africa. At the conference, the Commission launched a discussion document to start a country discussion on the use of technology in the elections. The policy discussion document assessed reasons for considering the introduction of e-voting in South Africa, the relevant constitutional principles, policy and legal frameworks that must precede the introduction of e-voting in the country, and available e-voting options, their technologies and cost implications, amongst others. The IEC's Chief Electoral Officer, Simon Mamabolo, says while the conference was successful, it's still too early to overhaul the country's electoral system.
There is no decision to implement e-voting. It's a matter that the country can't ignore. It's something that we need to debate, to look at the relative strengths and weaknesses, and to see what model, if we're to implement it, what model will be best suitable to our country, given the technological penetration which is differentiated for different areas in the country. The fact that the digital economy is uneven throughout the country. So those are the issues that must be taken into account in the conversation and in informing a decision whether such implementation is necessary.
The Commission says the low rates of registrations of young people during elections remains a concern. Mamabolo says the Commission will continue with efforts to engage South Africa's youth in electoral processes, ensuring that young persons understand their power and responsibility as voters.
In recognition of the youthful character of the country's population, the Commission persists with civic education drives targeting young learners and students across the country. The drill will focus on all university campuses and 180 technical and vocational training colleges, as well as private colleges nationwide. This ensuring that young persons are not only informed, but also actively participate in electoral processes. Additionally, the Commission is deploying campus-based registration ambassadors to assist students at the various tertiary institutions to register and update their registration details. This is crucial for ensuring that students are correctly registered and can vote at the correct voting station in future elections.
The minister in the presidency, Kumbuzo Nchaveni, recently reported that the next municipal elections will be held between the 2nd of November this year and the 1st of February 2027. Reporting for Channel Africa, I am Ndladla Mahlangu in Johannesburg.
And the time now being 8 minutes to 10 as we work our way towards Hotlines. We'll be speaking to Shayla in just a moment on what's coming up on their program. But first, let's tell you about this. The South African Democratic Teachers Union threatening to embark on a massive strike should their demands not be met in the next 21 days. The union embarked on a march on Wednesday to protest against austerity measures that they claim are undermining public service delivery and crippling the country's education system. Sisi Khalo is at the march and has more on what went on there.
members of one of South Africa's biggest teacher union braved the cold temperatures in the capital city of Pretoria to march to at least 3 departments to protest about budget cuts. The government departments in South Africa are National Treasury, Department of Basic Education, and Department of Higher Education and Training. The union says the budget cuts affect the education system negatively. The effects of it include increased learner-to-teacher ratios, lack of school infrastructure like halls, libraries, and laboratories, shortage of classrooms and toilets, and general dilapidation of buildings, including safety in the schools. Embarking on a march, SADU called on government to dare not touch education. General Secretary of SADU is Dr. Mungwena Maluleke.
We are giving them 21 days to engage and make sure that they attend to all these problems that we are giving them. There are quite a number of those problems that we are giving them. And we are saying this is the first warning. So the warning shot is that this is a march and thereafter we'll be embarking on a strike.
The union was supported by the Congress of South African Trade Unions, COSATU, of which SADU is an affiliate. The president of the federation, Zingiswa Losi, promised them that they will not look away while educators are suffering in the country.
As a federation, your federation, COSATU, we are here today to say to Treasury, we are not here for polite conversations. We are here to confront the enemy of our people, and that is the austerity. Comrades, these budget cuts are an assault on our children. They are an assault in our teachers. They are an assault to our community. They are an assault to the poor and the working class. And they are an assault to this country. And as a federation and as SADU are saying, we will not take it lying down.
The memorandums from the union were accepted by representatives from the said departments. Stadim Gomezulu accepted memorandums for 2 departments.
I am here to accept and sign and acknowledge the 2 memoranda to the Ministry of Finance and to the Ministry of Higher Education and Training. I put it upon myself to make sure that these memoranda reaches the 2 esteemed offices, and I think you have given them 21 days, is that right? 20 days left, 20 left. Oh, it's 20, no more 21. So, comrades, I will make sure that the memoranda reaches the offices and you get the responses. From Treasury, I can put my head on the block. We will respond within 21 days, but we will also ensure that the jihad follow suit and respond.
COSATU also hinted that they will also march if the public sector workers continue to suffer consequences of budget cuts. For Channel Africa, I'm Sisi Sekhalo in Pretoria, South Africa.
And we're just almost done with Africa World Hour. Just to remind you of some of the big stories that we have been looking at. Just a reminder that the International Monetary Fund has also projected that economic growth will slow to 3.8% in sub-Saharan Africa. Let's try that again. Sub-Saharan Africa this year, in line with a softer global outlook. It has slashed its global growth forecast to 2.8% this year, saying that abrupt increase in tariffs and increase in policy uncertainty were some of the major drivers of the economic outlook. And of course, this occurring within a very constrained environment for a lot of developing countries. So decreased earnings, even though reports are saying that, for instance, in South Africa, that the earnings levels have improved. They've been improving for the past year, but that doesn't really translate into the quality of life, because the price of goods and services are rising. So even if we have improved economic conditions, as had been reported coming into this year, that there was increased optimism around the country's political direction, from a policy direction. That's all turned on its head, hasn't it? Now we see an ANC government along with its GNU partners quibbling, fighting, taking each other to court over not only budget policy but fiscal framework policy arguments continuing. There's the VAT legal tussle that's ongoing. So it's going to be an interesting year for many of us with this tariff disputes that are ongoing as well, and the diplomatic machinations that go on with it. Well, Hotlines is coming up next from us here on Africa World Hour. That is it for the Wednesday show. I hope that you enjoyed the content that we gave you. Please do share with us if you have a certain news that is of interest to you wherever you are. Tell us what's happening in your world, what's happening around you, what's impacting your decisions, the conversations that you're having. That's why I always say that, because we don't just want to tell you what's happening. We'd like to hear from you and share with others. So always feel free to reach out to Africa World Hour on the socials. We are on channel 0802 on DSTV on the ODBK and on OpenView channel 628. So do stream us live from us. That's it for this evening. Do enjoy the rest of your listening. Shayla is up next. Until next time, good night.
We are on OpenView's audio bouquet, channel 628. If you are an upcoming artist looking to showcase your music to a wider audience, or just looking to promote your music on the radio, we can help. But there are a few things you can do to increase your chances of success. 1. Send your music to music@channelafrica.co.za. 2. We require the following information to help you best: your label, your ISRC code, title of the song, performer, composer, publisher, author, language, genre. These are the things we would like to compose your musical bio. 3. Listen to Channel Africa play your music on the radio. The perfect soundtrack for your day. With Channel Africa and your music, you will never be bored, because we play your music. Experience the best African music on Channel Africa, the African perspective. Hotlines bring you fresh perspectives about love after dark. When the sun goes down, we don't stop the talk. Channel Africa, the best nighttime radio.
Make them the choco. I'm feeling something good tonight. Seems I'm about to lose my mind.